4 years into the conflict, something is happening inside Russia that once seemed almost impossible. More and more people are openly criticizing the country's leadership instead of keeping those opinions behind closed doors. Videos shared online show ordinary citizens expressing frustration over everyday problems, from fuel shortages to repeated drone attacks, while asking difficult questions about how the situation has reached this point. At the same time, Ukraine has signaled that it plans to expand its long-range drone campaign if the fighting continues. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has argued that increasing pressure on targets deep inside Russia could force Moscow to reconsider its strategy. If those attacks become more frequent, they could mark another major turning point in the conflict. In today's video, we'll look at why public criticism inside Russia appears to be growing, how social media personalities are becoming part of the conversation, and why some officials are finding themselves under uncomfortable public scrutiny. We'll also examine the military developments that are reshaping daily life far from the front lines. Welcome back. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss future updates. For years, many analysts argued that the greatest challenge facing the Kremlin wasn't only international sanctions or battlefield losses, it was the possibility that fear inside Russia would begin to fade. Recent online videos suggest that at least some citizens are becoming more willing to speak openly. Instead of limiting criticism to local officials, some people are now directing their frustration toward the country's highest leadership. Their complaints range from corruption and government spending to questions about national security and the state's ability to protect key infrastructure. One issue drawing particular attention is fuel. Despite Russia being one of the world's largest energy producers, supply disruptions and refinery attacks have led to shortages in several areas. Long queues at filling stations have become symbols of a wider frustration, with many asking why a country rich in oil is struggling to keep fuel available for its own population. For many Russians, these daily inconveniences have made the war feel much closer to home. What once seemed like a distant military campaign is now affecting transportation, communication, and everyday routines. Another change that's becoming harder to ignore is who is speaking out. In the past, criticism often came from political activists or independent journalists. Now, it's also coming from people whose audiences have little to do with politics. One example is a well-known Russian-speaking influencer with millions of followers. Known primarily for fashion and lifestyle content, she recently posted a lengthy video expressing frustration over the direction the country is taking. Rather than focusing on military strategy, she talked about everyday life-restricted internet access, communication problems, and the feeling that normal life is becoming increasingly difficult. Her message spread rapidly online, drawing millions of views and sparking debate across Russian social media. Supporters praised her for saying what many people were already thinking, while critics accused her of exaggerating the country's problems. The response itself became part of the story, showing how quickly public conversations can grow once they begin. Some officials responded publicly, acknowledging that people were frustrated while defending the government's actions. Others dismissed the criticism outright. Regardless of which side they took, the fact that such a widely followed influencer had become part of the political conversation highlighted how much the online landscape has changed. Beyond social media, surveys conducted inside Russia have also attracted attention. Polling in an authoritarian system should always be viewed carefully, since many respondents may hesitate to answer honestly. Even so, some recent surveys have suggested a gradual decline in enthusiasm for continuing the war. Analysts argue that the trend may matter more than the exact numbers. If even officially published polls begin showing lower levels of support, it could indicate that public opinion is shifting enough that authorities can no longer ignore it. One reason for that shift may be that the consequences of the conflict are becoming more visible inside Russia itself. Drone attacks on refineries, fuel depots, and other infrastructure have disrupted daily life in ways many citizens had not experienced earlier in the war. The impact extends beyond fuel supplies. Temporary internet outages and communication disruptions have also become more common in some areas. Officials say these measures are intended to reduce security risks and make it more difficult for hostile drones to operate, but they also affect millions of ordinary residents trying to go about their daily routines. As a result, discussions that once centered on events hundreds of kilometers away are increasingly focused on problems people can see firsthand: long lines at gas stations, interrupted services, and uncertainty about what comes next. Crimea has become another area drawing significant attention. Reports indicate that some residents, particularly those with greater financial means, have been making plans to relocate or move valuable belongings elsewhere. Online advertisements for moving services and transportation have fueled speculation that some families are preparing for further instability. Meanwhile, Ukraine continues to describe its campaign against logistical infrastructure as an effort to make military operations on the peninsula more difficult. Damage to transportation routes and energy facilities has added pressure to daily life, creating challenges for both civilians and Russian authorities responsible for maintaining supplies. Whether these developments represent a lasting shift or only a temporary reaction remains uncertain. What is clear, however, is that the effects of the war are becoming increasingly visible far beyond the battlefield, shaping public debate in ways that were difficult to imagine only a few years ago. As public frustration continues to grow, pressure is also increasing on Russian officials who have been among the strongest supporters of the war. During campaign appearances and public meetings, some politicians are finding themselves confronted with questions that would have been almost unthinkable in the early stages of the conflict. Instead of asking about economic programs or local development, citizens are increasingly raising one difficult issue. If government leaders are urging others to make sacrifices for the country, should those leaders also be expected to share the same risks? That question has become more common on social media, where short video clips of public exchanges often spread far beyond their original audiences. A single uncomfortable moment can now reach millions of viewers within hours, fueling even more debate online. At the same time, the security atmosphere inside Moscow appears to be changing. Authorities have expanded surveillance, increased police visibility, and responded more aggressively to activities they believe could trigger public demonstrations or unrest. Human rights organizations and independent observers have reported that even minor acts of public expression are sometimes met with swift intervention. Supporters of these measures argue that they are necessary because of the ongoing conflict and the threat of attacks inside Russia. Critics, however, say the government is becoming increasingly sensitive to any sign of dissatisfaction, no matter how small. These developments come as Ukraine continues to expand its long-range strike capabilities. Over the past year, drone attacks have reached military facilities, industrial sites, and infrastructure located hundreds of kilometers from the front line. While Russian air defenses intercept many of these drones, some continue to penetrate deep into Russian territory, creating uncertainty for residents who once believed the war would never reach their cities. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has repeatedly argued that increasing pressure on targets inside Russia is intended to make the Kremlin feel the consequences of continuing the war. His administration has suggested that as Ukraine increases domestic drone production, the frequency of long-range operations could also rise. Military analysts note that the psychological impact of these attacks may be just as significant as the physical damage. Even when infrastructure is quickly repaired, repeated air raid alerts, temporary airport closures, and disruptions to transportation remind residents that the conflict is no longer confined to distant battlefields. For many people living in Moscow, this represents a major shift. During the first years of the war, daily life in the capital remained relatively stable compared with regions closer to the fighting. Today, that sense of distance is becoming harder to maintain as security incidents become more frequent. Economic pressure is adding another layer of concern. Businesses must adapt to supply disruptions, transportation delays, and higher operating costs, while ordinary families continue to deal with rising prices and uncertainty about the future. Although the Russian economy has avoided some of the worst predictions made early in the conflict, many sectors continue to face significant challenges. Taken together, these military, economic, and political pressures are reshaping the public conversation inside Russia. Whether this leads to lasting political change remains impossible to predict. However, one thing is becoming increasingly clear: the war is affecting everyday life in ways that extend far beyond the battlefield. and that reality is becoming more difficult for both citizens and officials to ignore. As these developments continue to unfold, another question is beginning to dominate discussions both inside and outside Russia. How long can the current strategy continue before the pressure becomes too great? For much of the conflict, the Kremlin maintained that life across most of the country could continue with relatively few disruptions. While the fighting remained concentrated hundreds of kilometers away, many Russians were able to separate their daily routines from the realities of the battlefield. That separation is becoming increasingly difficult. Recent weeks have seen repeated reports of fuel shortages in some regions, temporary internet restrictions, transportation disruptions, and heightened security measures following drone attacks. Even when these problems are short-lived, they contribute to a growing sense that the conflict is having a direct impact on everyday life. State television has largely framed these hardships as sacrifices that citizens should be prepared to endure. Commentators often compare today's situation with earlier periods in Russian history, arguing that previous generations also faced shortages and eventually overcame them. The message is clear: remain patient, support the government, and view current difficulties as part of a larger national struggle. Not everyone accepts that explanation. On social media, many users have questioned why a country with vast natural resources is experiencing recurring disruptions to fuel supplies and public services. Others argue that the government should focus more attention on improving conditions at home rather than sustaining an expensive military campaign abroad. These conversations are significant because they represent a noticeable shift in public discussion. During the early years of the war, criticism was often cautious and indirect. Today, more people appear willing to connect the economic and social challenges they face with decisions made at the highest levels of government. Meanwhile, Ukraine continues emphasizing that its strategy is aimed at increasing pressure on Russian military logistics and infrastructure. Ukrainian officials argue that forcing Russia to divert resources toward defending its own territory complicates military operations and raises the overall cost of continuing the war. Military experts point out that modern conflicts are fought on multiple fronts simultaneously. Success is measured not only by territorial gains but also by industrial production, logistics, technological innovation, and public morale. The side that can sustain these areas over the long term often gains an important advantage. Another issue drawing attention is Russia's continued reliance on foreign-made electronic components that have appeared inside recovered missiles and drones. Investigators examining wreckage have reported finding parts originally manufactured by companies in Western countries. Analysts say many of these components likely reached Russia through complex international supply chains involving third-party countries rather than direct sales. This has renewed calls for tighter export controls and stronger enforcement of existing sanctions. Governments supporting Ukraine argue that reducing Russia's access to advanced technology could make it more difficult to replace precision-guided weapons over time. Despite these efforts, experts caution that completely shutting down these supply networks is extremely difficult. Electronic components designed for civilian products often have legitimate commercial uses, making it challenging to prevent every item from eventually being diverted for military purposes. Looking ahead, both sides appear to be preparing for a prolonged conflict. Russia continues expanding defense production while Ukraine invests heavily in drone technology, long-range strike capabilities, and cooperation with Western partners. Neither side has signaled that a negotiated settlement is close. For civilians, however, the costs continue to grow. Families on both sides of the border are living with uncertainty, economic strain, and the constant reminder that the conflict remains far from over. Whether the coming months bring renewed diplomatic efforts or further escalation, one thing is increasingly evident: the war has entered a new phase. Military operations, political pressure, economic challenges, and public opinion are now influencing one another more than ever before, making the situation increasingly complex and difficult to predict. As always, we'll continue following these developments closely and bring you updates as new information becomes available. Thanks for watching, and if you found this analysis helpful, consider subscribing so you don't miss future reports.